August 14, 2005, 7:30 a.m. A routine flight turns into a harrowing nightmare as Helios Airways Flight 522, en route from Cyprus to Prague via Athens, gets trapped at 35,000 feet with no communication for over an hour. Desperate to unravel the mystery, the Greek army dispatches F-16 fighter jets, only to find an empty cockpit. The events that follow are catastrophic, marking one of the darkest moments in European aviation history. The burning question remains: what went wrong on Helios Flight 522? The mysterious banging noise. The story of Helios Flight 522 began on Saturday, August 13, 2005, at 9 p.m. when a Boeing 737 aircraft named Olympia took off from London Heathrow bound for Larnaca, Cyprus. Owned by Helios Airways, a low-cost Cypriot airline that operated flights between Cyprus and Europe, the flight initially seemed uneventful. However, during the flight, the crew heard a strange banging noise coming from one of the plane's doors, and upon inspection, they discovered that the door seal was frozen and there was a note made in the aircraft cabin defect log. When the plane landed at Larnaca Airport at 1:25 a.m. local time, the captain reviewed the notes and personally spoke to the ground engineer team to request a full inspection. The inspection was carried out by Alan Irwin, a 44-year-old engineer from the UK who had been hired by Helios Airways on a 6-month contract and was well liked by his colleagues. Following standard procedure for a Boeing 737, Alan conducted a cabin pressurization leak check to test the door's integrity. To do this, he manually pressurized the plane while it was on the ground, which required switching the pressurization mode selector from auto to manual, located on the cockpit panel. It's important to note that a plane's onboard pressurization system automatically ensures adequate oxygenation as it gains altitude, but a manual option is available for ground tests. Despite their efforts, Alan and his team were unable to recreate the problem during the inspection. They carried on with other routine checks and noted that there were no known defects, leaks, or abnormal noises in the aircraft. They believed that the onboard pressurization system was working properly, unaware that the pressurization mode selector had not been set back to auto after the manual test. Fatal errors and miscommunications. On August 14, 2005 at 3:15 a.m. local time, Helios Flight 522 was released for its scheduled 6 a.m. flight to Prague via Athens. However, due to staff sickness, the crew for the flight arrived just an hour before departure to complete the pre-flight briefing. The crew consisted of 2 last-minute replacements, flight attendants Luisa Vuteri and Andreas Prodromou, along with the experienced pilots, Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten and First Officer Pampos Charalambous. Little did they know that their flight would end in tragedy. Captain Hans had been fired from his previous job 3 months prior for repeatedly failing to comply with standard procedures, a fact unknown to Helios and the rest of the crew as references were never checked. First Officer Pampos had also complained about Hans's attitude multiple times and was actively seeking new employment. As the flight attendants prepared for takeoff, the pilots rushed through their pre-flight checklists, failing to notice that the pressurization mode selector was still on manual due to the flight being slightly behind schedule. After takeoff, at 6:11 a.m., the plane was cleared for its cruising altitude of 34,000 feet. However, due to the pressurization mode selector being on manual, the cabin was not pressurizing automatically, resulting in thinning air and decreasing oxygen levels. Despite multiple cockpit indicators showing abnormal cabin altitude, neither Hans nor Pampos noticed the issue as they climbed to 12,000 feet. At 12,000 feet, a loud alarm sounded in the cockpit, indicating a cabin pressurization issue and the need for immediate use of oxygen masks. However, the pilots misinterpreted it as an erroneous takeoff configuration warning. Hans made a confusing call to the ground dispatcher, mentioning the warning and a ventilation cooling system error, but contradicted himself moments later. Unbeknownst to them, both pilots were suffering from rapid onset hypoxia, a condition caused by oxygen deprivation. Hypoxia has strange effects on the human body. The first symptom is a slight worsening of vision, followed by confusion, disorientation, lack of coordination, and mood changes. Some individuals experience extreme irritability, while others feel euphoric. One of the most terrifying aspects of hypoxia is that it can cause a disassociation from the self, making it difficult for people to understand what is happening to them. In the case of Hans and Pampos, they failed to put on their oxygen masks when the alarm went off at 15,000 feet. As a result, they experienced the symptoms of hypoxia very quickly. Despite the warning light indicating that oxygen masks had dropped, the pilots were too impaired to understand what was happening. They became distracted by an equipment cooling light and failed to address the underlying problem of inadequate pressurization. 13 minutes after takeoff, the line went silent. Passengers inside the cabin would have only had a few minutes of oxygen left, and it is likely that there would have been panic and confusion. The cabin crew would have been aware that the masks were running out of oxygen, but the plane was on autopilot and continuing to climb to 34,000 feet. A desperate struggle for survival and control. At 6:29 a.m., as Flight 522's passengers and crew were struggling in their last moments of consciousness, the Helios dispatcher, who initially received the call from the first officer, Hans, contacted ground control at nearby Nicosia Airport. He stated that he had not been able to make contact with the flight for 9 minutes. The dispatcher at Nicosia Airport also failed to reach the cockpit. 16 minutes after last contact, at 6:36 a.m., Flight 522 entered Athens airspace and was handed over to Athenian Air Control. Over the next 40 minutes, the Air Control Center team at Athens and several planes in the vicinity attempted and failed to make contact, making over 30 calls across multiple frequencies. However, the flight still looked as if it was operating as normal, leading teams on the ground to theorize that there was an issue with the onboard radio system. At 7:20 a.m., Flight 522 began what looked like a standard approach procedure, but Air Control watched in utter astonishment as the plane began to slowly turn back around in the same direction that it came, entering what is known as an automated holding pattern as part of its missed approach procedure over the Greek island of Kea. It was here that Flight 522 stayed flying around on a repeated loop. At this point, teams on the ground knew that something was desperately wrong. By 8:23 a.m., the emergency level was elevated to alert the Hellenic Air Force, which dispatched 2 F-16 fighter aircraft. Just 9 minutes later, at 8:32 a.m., the 2 F-16 pilots described the disaster that was about to unfold before everyone's eyes. Teams on the ground listened in horror as they were told that the first officer, Pampos Charalambous, was slumped over the control panel and the captain, Hans-Jürgen Merten, was nowhere to be seen. Later, they would find out that he had passed out searching for the switch behind his seat. No one was flying that plane. The 2 F-16 pilots went on to describe how all passengers were sitting completely motionless with their oxygen masks dangling uselessly above them. At 8:49 a.m., during the plane's 10th holding pattern, the F-16 pilot observed someone slowly making their way to the cockpit. The person put on a pair of headphones and placed their hand on the controls in front of them. But just 1 minute later, the left engine stopped working due to fuel deprivation, and the plane all of a sudden began to rapidly descend. The following conversation was recorded between the 2 F-16 pilots and the rescue teams on the ground.
Φορούσε ένα γυλαίκο και μπλε πουκάμισο, δεν έδειχνε να φοράει στολή. Γυλαίκο και μπλε πουκάμισο.
It was at this point that they realized that the person in the cockpit was Andreas Prodromou, one of the flight attendants who agreed to fill in for a sick colleague at the last moment. Andreas, investigators would later find out, was a qualified pilot, but he had no training on a Boeing 737. The plane was now rapidly losing altitude at a rate of around 1,500 feet per minute.
Τα οπτικά σήματα δείχνει ότι δεν ανταποκρίνεται.
The F-16 pilots desperately tried to make visual contact, but Andreas was not responding. Instead, the words, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday, this is Helios Airways Flight 522 inches" were weakly spoken into the cockpit radio, which was set to the wrong frequency. These recordings would later be recovered from the crash site, but as the plane was going down, Andreas was speaking into the void. Flight 522, crash and its aftermath.
Terrain. Pull up. Sink rate. Sink rate. Terrain. Pull up.
At 8:59 a.m., the right engine of the Helios Airways Flight 522 failed, and the plane began to descend rapidly. The F-16 pilot attempted to signal the plane to descend, but was unsuccessful. At 9:03 a.m., the plane collided with the hilly terrain at 400 miles per hour, causing a fireball that instantly killed all 121 people on board. The incident sparked wild speculation among the media, but an air accident investigation report revealed multiple failures to recognize cabin pressurization issues that arose on the day. The report also revealed an ineffective and dangerous organizational culture that bent the rules beyond recognition. One question that is often asked about Helios Flight 522 is why the cabin crew did not immediately enter the cockpit and make contact with teams on the ground over the radio. The report itself states that this is rather puzzling. It is possible that some of the cabin crew may have attempted to share their masks with younger passengers, creating an extremely dangerous situation. Helios Airways continued operations until November 2006, but sustained massive losses and eventually went out of business. In 2007, several families of those who died in the crash sued Boeing for €76 million. All parties settled out of court. In 2008, 4 Helios officials, including Alan Irwin, were charged with manslaughter and were eventually found guilty in April 2012. However, Alan Irwin successfully appealed in 2013, and other Helios officials were able to pay their way out of a 10-year sentence for €79,000. A memorial dedicated to the victims has been built on the crash site as a reminder of the lives lost in this unbelievable tragedy. That's all for this video. To ensure that you don't miss any of our new videos, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Until next time, take care. Thanks for watching.